She came with nothing but desperation. He had nothing but solitude. Neither knew that the mountain had been waiting for them to find each other. Not to survive, not to hide, but to finally, after years of running and years of emptiness, become whole. The smoke rose thin and pale against the gray October sky, barely visible through the dense pines that crowded the mountainside. Clara Brennan saw it from half a mile down the trail, and for the first time in 3 days, she felt something other than the cold numbness that had settled into her bones. Smoke meant shelter. Smoke meant warmth. Smoke meant someone who might, if God showed even the smallest mercy, help them before the coming snow buried them all. Her children walked behind her in silence. They'd stopped asking questions yesterday. Emma, 12 years old and trying desperately to be brave, held her younger brother's hand with a grip that had gone white-knuckled hours ago. Thomas, only 7, stumbled more than walked now, his small legs giving out every few steps. And baby Sarah, not yet 2, rode on Clara's hip, her face buried against her mother's neck, whimpering softly with the kind of exhaustion that had no tears left. They'd been walking since dawn. Before that, they'd walked through most of the night. Clara too terrified to stop, too afraid that if they rested, they'd never get up again. The wagon had broken its axle 2 days back, miles from anywhere, and her husband, no, he wasn't her husband anymore. He'd made that clear when he'd taken their only horse and ridden off, shouting back that she'd gotten them into this mess with her stubbornness, that he was done trying to make something work with a woman too proud to know when she was beaten. He'd left them with a broken wagon, no horse, no food except half a sack of flour that was now gone, and winter coming down from the high peaks like a judgment. Clara's feet had stopped hurting somewhere around midnight. That scared her more than the pain had. Feet that didn't hurt meant feet that were freezing, and frozen feet meant she wouldn't be able to walk much longer. But she kept moving, one step and then another, because stopping meant dying, and she had 3 children who needed her to be stronger than she'd ever been in her life. The trail narrowed as it climbed, and the smoke grew thicker. Then through the trees she saw it. A cabin, solidly built from hand-hewn logs, with a stone chimney sending up that precious gray thread of warmth. No other buildings around it, no barn, no shed, just the cabin and the forest pressing close on all sides. Whoever lived here lived alone and wanted it that way. Clara didn't care. She climbed the last 100 yards on legs that barely held her weight, Emma half carrying Thomas now, both of them supporting each other. When they reached the cabin door, Clara set Sarah down long enough to raise her fist and knock. The sound was weak, barely audible even to her own ears. She knocked again, harder, putting everything she had left into it. Nothing. No sound from inside. No footsteps. The panic that had been hovering at the edges of her consciousness rushed in like floodwater. The cabin was empty. Whoever lived here was gone, and they were going to die on this doorstep. So close to warmth they could smell the wood smoke but unable to reach it. Then the door opened. The man who stood there was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard shot through with silver and eyes that had forgotten how to welcome strangers. He was maybe 45, maybe older, dressed in worn wool and leather, an axe hanging from his belt. He looked at Clara and her children with an expression that wasn't quite hostile but wasn't kind either. Just wary, tired. Like a man who'd been left alone so long he'd forgotten how to be anything else. "Please," Clara managed, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. "My children. They need warmth. Just for tonight. We'll leave at first light. Please." The man's eyes moved from Clara to the children. Emma, trying so hard to stand straight despite the trembling in her legs. Thomas, swaying on his feet, too exhausted to even look up. Baby Sarah, whimpering softly, her lips tinged blue with cold. Something changed in the man's face. Not softness exactly, but recognition. Like he was seeing something he understood even if he didn't want to. He stepped aside. "Get in, all of you." Clara didn't need to be told twice. She gathered Sarah back into her arms and ushered Emma and Thomas through the door. The warmth hit them like a physical thing, so intense after the cold that it almost hurt. The cabin was sparse but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, a real fire crackling in it, not just coals but actual flames. A table and 2 chairs sat near the fire. A rope bed stood in one corner, neatly made. Shelves lined with supplies, tools hanging from pegs, Everything organized with the precision of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. The man closed the door behind them, shutting out the wind that had started to pick up. He studied them for a moment, then moved to the fire. "Sit," he said, not unkindly, "close to the heat. I'll make coffee." Clara lowered herself into one of the chairs, Sarah still clinging to her. Emma and Thomas collapsed onto the floor near the fire, too exhausted to care about manners or propriety. The man worked in silence, filling a battered pot with water from a bucket, adding coffee grounds, hanging it over the fire. He pulled down tin cups from a shelf. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of someone who'd done these things alone for so long it had become ritual. "You got names?" he asked finally, not looking at them. "Clara Brennan," she said, her voice still hoarse. "This is Emma, Thomas, and Sarah." The man nodded. "Samuel Locke, this is my mountain." He poured coffee into the cups, handed one to Clara. It was bitter and strong and the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. "Where were you headed?" "West," Clara said. "Colorado, maybe." "Somewhere we could start over." "Start over from what?" Clara hesitated, then decided the truth was easier than lies. Bad marriage. Bad decisions. "Husband left us 2 days back when the wagon broke." Took the horse and rode off. Samuel's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't comment. Instead, he pulled down bread and dried meat from his supplies, set them on the table. "Kids need to eat." Emma and Thomas fell on the food like they were starving, which Clara realized they were. She tore off small pieces of bread for Sarah, softened them in her mouth before giving them to the baby. Samuel watched the meat, his expression unreadable. "Storm's coming," he said after a while. "Can smell it on the air. You leave at first light. You'll be caught in it before you're off the mountain. Kill you and the children both." Clara felt her stomach drop. "How long?" "Storm like this? Could last 3 days. Could last a week." He refilled her coffee cup. "You're welcome to stay until it passes. I've got supplies enough for extra mouths for a while." "I can't pay you," Clara said, the words bitter in her mouth. "Didn't ask for payment." Samuel turned away, adding wood to the fire. "Just don't touch my things and keep the children quiet. I'm not used to noise." That night, Samuel gave Clara and the children his bed while he rolled out blankets on the floor near the fire. Clara tried to protest, but he cut her off with a look that said the matter wasn't up for discussion. She lay there in the dark, her 3 children pressed close against her, listening to the wind begin to howl outside as the storm Samuel had predicted rolled in. She thought about how close they'd come to dying, how if they'd missed this cabin, if Samuel Locke had turned them away, they'd be corpses in the snow by morning. She whispered a prayer of thanks to whatever force had guided them here. To this mountain, to this cabin, to this silent, solitary man who'd shown them more kindness in one evening than her own husband had in the last year of their marriage. Morning came gray and heavy with snow. Clara woke to find Samuel already up, the fire built high, coffee brewing. He'd laid out more bread and some dried apples on the table. The children stirred slowly, Thomas rubbing his eyes, Emma sitting up carefully so as not to wake Sarah. "Storm's here," Samuel said without preamble. "Be 3 days at least before it's safe to travel." "Maybe more." Clara nodded, accepting it. What choice did she have? "We'll stay out of your way. I can cook if you'll let me. Clean, earn our keep." Something flickered across Samuel's face. "You're not servants. You're guests until the storm passes. That's all," but Clara couldn't sit idle. Years of marriage to a man who demanded she earn every scrap of food and moment of shelter had trained her too well. While Samuel went about his morning routine, checking his traps, bringing in more wood, Clara cleaned the cabin. She wasn't intrusive about it, just putting things in order, sweeping the floor, organizing the supplies on the shelves more efficiently. Emma helped without being asked, and even Thomas tried, though mostly he just moved things from one place to another without much purpose. When Samuel came back in, stamping snow from his boots, he stopped in the doorway and looked around. The cabin gleamed. The floor was spotless. His supplies were organized in a way that actually made more sense than how he'd had them. Clara held her breath, waiting for anger, for accusation that she'd overstepped. Instead, Samuel just nodded slowly. "Appreciate it," he said gruffly. "Place needed attention, I haven't given it." Relief flooded through Clara. She'd been terrified he'd throw them out into the storm for touching his things. "I'll make stew for supper if you have vegetables," she offered. "Root cellars out back. Take what you need." The days fell into a rhythm. Samuel would wake before dawn, tend the fire, go out into the storm to check his trap lines or bring in wood. He was gone for hours sometimes, returning ice-crusted and silent, but he always brought something back. A rabbit, a grouse. Once, part of a deer he'd brought down the week before and had hanging in his smokehouse. Clara would cook, making the supplies stretch, turning simple ingredients into meals that filled the cabin with smells Samuel clearly hadn't experienced in years. She'd catch him sometimes, just standing still, breathing in the scent of bread baking or stew simmering, his eyes distant. The children began to come alive again. The first day they'd been silent and exhausted. The second day Thomas started asking questions. By the third day, Emma was smiling and Sarah had stopped whimpering. They gravitated toward Samuel despite his gruffness. Thomas especially, the boy following the woodsman around whenever Samuel was inside, asking about his tools, his traps, the animals on the mountain. Samuel answered each question with patience Clara hadn't expected. He showed Thomas how to carve wood, gave Emma a book from his shelf to read, even let Sarah play with small carved animals he pulled from a box under his bed. One evening, Clara noticed the carved animals had a soft quality to them, made with care and love. They'd been children's toys once. "You had a family," she said softly one night after the children had fallen asleep. Samuel was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Clara thought he wouldn't answer, thought she'd overstepped again. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with disuse and old pain. "Wife and a son. Fever took them both 8 years back. Same week." He paused. "This mountain was supposed to be our dream. Build a life away from the world. But after they died, it just became the place I came to forget." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Me too." Samuel added another log to the fire. "Funny thing about forgetting, though. You can bury yourself in solitude, work yourself to exhaustion, cut yourself off from every living soul, and it still doesn't work. All you end up with is silence. And silence isn't peace. It's just empty." Clara understood. She'd felt that same emptiness in her marriage, surrounded by people but utterly alone. "What was his name?" "Your son." "Thomas." Clara's breath caught. She looked at her sleeping boy, curled up near the fire with his sister. I know," Samuel said. "Noticed the first day. Same age mine would have been too. Same curiosity." He stood abruptly. "I'll check the woodpile." He went outside even though the woodpile was full. Clara understood that too. Some grief was too big to carry sitting still. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. Clara woke to sunshine streaming through the cabin's small window, the first clear sky in nearly a week. The snow had stopped. The wind had died. The trail would be passable in a day, maybe 2. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something close to dread. They'd have to leave. They'd imposed on Samuel's hospitality long enough. It was time to move on, to continue their journey to wherever they were going. Except Clara realized she had no idea where they were going. Colorado had been her husband's dream, not hers. She'd just been following because she had nowhere else to go. Samuel was quiet that day. He went through his routines, but something was different. Emma noticed it too. "Is he angry we're still here?" She whispered to Clara, "No, sweetheart. I think he's just used to being alone." But that evening, after the children had eaten and were playing quietly near the fire, Samuel asked Clara to step outside with him. They stood on the small porch, looking out over the snow-covered mountain that glittered in the dying light. "Trail will be clear by tomorrow," Samuel said. "I know." Clara pulled her shawl tighter. "We'll leave in the morning." "You've been more than generous, Samuel. More than we had any right to expect. Where will you go?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "Find a town, I suppose. Find work. I can sew, I can cook, You can stay." The words hung in the cold air between them. Clara turned to look at him, certain she'd misheard. Samuel kept his eyes on the horizon. "I meant what I said about this place needing attention I haven't given it. And not just the cabin, the mountain. I've been living here like a ghost, just surviving, not really living." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough. "Your children, Clara, they brought something back I thought died with my family. Laughter, purpose, the feeling that maybe tomorrow's worth waking up for." "Samuel, I'm not asking anything improper," he said quickly. "I've got land enough to build another cabin. You and the children could have this one, or we could add rooms, make it bigger. I've got timber and I know how to use it." He finally looked at her. "I'm asking you to stay." Not as servants, not as charity cases, as neighbors, as people who share this mountain. Let me teach your son what my Thomas never got to learn. Let me give your daughters a safe place to grow. Let me," his voice cracked, "let me be part of something again. Part of a family, even if it's not mine by blood." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Why would you do this? You don't know us. We could be—" "I know enough," Samuel said firmly. "I know you walked for days to keep your children alive. I know you work without being asked and teach your children kindness. I know Emma reads to her brother every night, and Thomas asks questions because he's curious about the world, and little Sarah laughs when I whittle." He paused. "And I know that for the first time in 8 years, my cabin feels like a home again." Clara looked back through the window at her children. Emma was braiding Sarah's hair while Thomas carved a piece of wood Samuel had given him, his tongue stuck out in concentration. They were happy. For the first time since the wagon had broken, since their father had abandoned them, since everything had fallen apart, they were happy, safe, warm, wanted. "The children would need schooling," she said softly. "I've got books, and we could bring in a teacher once things are settled. Winter on this mountain must be hard." "It is, but easier with help, with family." Clara turned to face him fully. "I won't marry out of desperation, Samuel. Won't trade one bad situation for another just because I'm scared." "I'm not asking you to marry me," Samuel said, and there was no hurt in his voice, just understanding. "I'm asking you to stay. Build something here together. If someday it becomes more than that, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. If it doesn't, then we'll be friends and neighbors who help each other survive. Either way, you'll have a home. Your children will have a home. And I'll have." He trailed off, then finished simply. "I'll have a reason to keep going." Inside, Thomas laughed at something Emma had said. The sound carried clear and bright through the thin cabin walls. Samuel closed his eyes like the sound hurt and healed him at the same time. "All right," Clara whispered. "We'll stay. Try it for a while. See if it works." Samuel nodded once, sharp and certain. "It'll work." And somehow, standing there on the porch with the mountain stretching out before them and her children's laughter echoing in the cold air, Clara believed him. Spring came slowly to the mountain. By then, Samuel had added 2 rooms to the cabin, working through the winter with a determination Clara recognized as purpose rediscovered. Thomas followed him everywhere, learning to saw, hammer, and measure. Emma helped Clara plant a garden in the space they'd cleared, talking about all the vegetables they'd grow come summer. Sarah took her first real steps crossing the cabin floor, reaching for Samuel with chubby arms and calling him Samuel in her baby voice. Clara and Samuel never spoke of marriage, but somewhere between the first thaw and the spring planting, the separate sleeping arrangements became less rigid, not improper, nothing the children would question, but closer, like 2 people learning to trust again, carefully and without demands. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the meadow, Samuel reached over and took Clara's hand, just held it, rough calluses against her work-worn palm. She laced her fingers through his and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing us that day, for not turning us away." "Thank you," Samuel replied, "for knocking on my door, for bringing life back to this mountain, for making me remember what a home is supposed to feel like." Years later, when the children were grown and had families of their own, they would bring them back to the mountain to visit. They'd tell their children about the winter storm, about the desperate flight, about the cabin that appeared through the snow like a miracle. They'd tell them about Samuel Locke, the lonely woodsman who'd taken in a widow and her 3 children, not knowing they would become his family forever. And Samuel, older now but still strong, would sit on that same porch with Clara beside him, surrounded by grandchildren who called him Grandpa Sam without question or qualification, and he'd think about how close he'd come to spending the rest of his life in silence. How one moment of choosing kindness over solitude had changed everything. "Best decision I ever made," he'd tell Clara, "was opening that door." "Best decision I ever made," she'd reply, "was knocking on it." And their family, built not from blood but from choice, from need and compassion and second chances, would spread out before them like a living testament to the truth that sometimes family isn't something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you find on a mountain, in a storm, when 2 broken people decide that together they might finally become whole.